We're at the Big Data Expo in Utrecht, the Netherlands, and I'm speaking with Bob van Luijt, co-founder and CEO of Weaviate. Bob, could you briefly introduce yourself and the Weaviate product line, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So Weaviate is an open source vector database, and the vector database is a piece of infrastructure that's born in the wake of everything that was happening in machine learning. You know, before we called it AI. So before it was cool, as I like to say. And it basically takes care of storing the representation coming from machine learning models, these so-called vector embeddings. And probably, you know, during the conversation, we're probably going to dive a little bit deeper in use case and those kind of things. But it's like, it's all born in the wake of AI. And it's infrastructure. So we have an infrastructure company, database company.
Now, can you explain what's a vector database and what purpose does it serve precisely?
Yeah, so if you store data in a database, then you have a data type, right? So like can be text, a string, an integer, a floating point, what have you. But out of these machine learning models, a different data type. There was like the data was represented with a different data type, a so-called vector embedding. And that's like a kind of a geographical representation of data. So basically, how does one data object relate to something else plotted in distance? So the example that I often give is that if you would take, I don't know, Eiffel Tower and Paris, it's more closely related than Eiffel Tower and London, for example, right, in that vector space. And in the first iteration, the big new use case for that was search, like better search. Because now if I had a data object that says like the Eiffel Tower is in Paris, I could retrieve it from the database by searching for landmarks in France. And that was like new. And that was like the combination of the models with the database. Out of that, in the whole wake of like ChatGPT, etc., there were like newer use cases came out where you basically need to help the model to understand what kind of answers to generate. But the first original use case, how it started, was just quote unquote better search. That's how it started.
Generative AI took the world by storm in about a year. What are the consequences for the technical aspect?
Yeah, so what I always like to joke is that I say like there's like a pre and a post ChatGPT era, because the generative model we're partnering with all these companies, right? So we're partnering with like the open source models, but also OpenAI, Cohere, etc. We work with all these companies together as a vector database provider, and these generative models, they were there. It's like it's not that. I mean, now like the latest versions are better, but they were just there. The big thing that changed with ChatGPT was like that there was like an eye-opening aspect, that people were like, who were not on the technical level, they were like, oh boy, this is something we want to do with the data as well. And in the wake of that, what happened was that people said like, okay, you know, the whole ChatGPT thing, the generative AI thing, it's awesome, but how are we going to do that on our own data in a fast, reliable way? And there was like, hey, wait a second, there's this type of database, so-called vector database like Weaviate. Turns out, because it has these vector embeddings, that we can have these search queries, get the documents out, inject them into the models. So now the second use case emerged besides just pure semantic search. And it was something that the technical term is retrieval augmented generation. So you do retrieval, you augment the results by retrieving data from the database to generate new content. So basically the first use case we saw there was like people just building chat applications on their own data. Now we see people generate completely different things, right? So again, ranging from healthcare to publishing to you name it, where really let you, as we always like to joke, is like you Weaviate, to weave the models and the database together. And that is what we're seeing right now. And that is so in the wake of Gen AI, that was the thing where really the vector database and the models really came together.
Because you spend a lot of time in the United States, if you compare US and Europe, could you give some insights in the state of development and knowledge about AI?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at the US, so actually we need to, if you make the distinction like the US and Europe, I would suggest adding like one more distinction to that, and that is California, the US and Europe. So if we take California specifically and then double click on the Bay Area, that's just where it happens, because that's just where people go, right? So the understanding of what was possible and what was created was already happening there for quite some time. out of that, you need to bring that to developers or organizations, throughout the world. And then it's kind of logical that because California is like a U.S. state, that you see it first on the East Coast, and then it goes to the inlands. But while it goes to the East Coast, it also kind of jumps to Europe and Asia, Japan, those kind of things. So we see that as well. So yes, there's a distinction between the U.S. and Europe, but I would say the heart is in the Bay Area. Then for obvious reasons, because it's just one country, it just easily jumps to like New York or like Austin and those kind of places, LA, and then it kind of jumps to this. So you can see Bay Area, New York, Berlin, Amsterdam, London. It's kind of similar, and then it trickles through. So it's like there are some cultural differences, but if you take California out of the equation, it's pretty similar. Yeah.
What should Europe do to catch up?
So, what I noticed is that maybe it's a little bit like a cultural thing, but there's a little bit more hesitation. So what is this? Can we do this? Do we have the right regulation in place? That kind of stuff. And I would argue, start building. There's so much. There's also when you're, for example, in the Bay Area, but now also in New York, it's like there's so much excitement. And you also feel that excitement when you're in Berlin or certain places like in Amsterdam, etc. London, there's so much excitement. So, who knows, maybe it's a cultural thing, but just trying to tap into that excitement and start to create and build new things rather than, trying to figure out, legislation, that kind of stuff first. Yeah.
We like to do that, figure out legislation first, GDPR and all stuff like that. Okay, final question. How do you think AI deployment will develop in the data field? And can you share your view on that?
Okay, so you mean deployment as in like how we use it, or deployment more from the perspective of like the kind of applications that we will make with it?
Kind of applications that we make with it.
Yeah, okay. So there are two ways to look at this. One is what I would like to call the pessimistic view, and the other one the optimistic view. So the pessimistic view might be this, these vector databases. It's a new type it's a new data type, so it's a new NoSQL type of database. Yes, we start to work with these models, but we're early on the app cycle, and that's the pessimistic view, right? So it's just a new data type to build new things. I'm, on the other hand, part of the optimistic, like the glass half full person, where I'm saying no. A paradigm shift is happening, is how we are creating applications. The paradigm shift sits in the fact that we start to do prompt engineering and those kind of things, and that from our perspective, the database and then from the model providers, the models, that they start to get optimized to basically enable people to have dialogue and even anthropomorphize with their data stacks. And that people create completely new applications. I mean, here at the event, I spoke with a couple of people that are just saying we just need to change our 180-degree way of thinking. Of we start to talk and interact with our data rather than just build a new data layer or ontology or those kind of things. So it's a paradigm shift. It's like, I remember when I started with Gen AI, I was even trying to, in my prompt, I was trying to give some structure, and I was like, I don't need to do that. Like we're having a conversation now, I can start to interact with my data like that. So in Weaviate, we call that generative feedback loop, so that you basically give the model permission to just update my data. If you think there's something wrong, and these are the guidelines, just fix it. And that is the optimistic point of view. And then of course I really hope that this is like we had of course the internet and the web, we got mobile phones, and now we have this whole AI wave where people are actually building new stuff. This is not a promise anymore. People are building today. There's so much research happening, there's so much excitement. The window of opportunities open right now for people to start building in a completely radical new way.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, for the interview.
Thanks for having me.